I always talk about giving ourselves grace. Like, I want to remind people that our neighbors aren't projects, like they're actually humans. And so we should not put so much pressure on, like, I got to convert them. We got to get to the gospel, Like, maybe that happens over time, so. But I want to walk that road, that road carefully because, we are about evangelism, so.
Practice. This episode we'll call smoke, not even hospitality.
Yeah, smoke.
You ready, man?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. 3, 2, 1.
We are all becoming someone. The things that we do the most and what most has our attention very much shapes the kind of person we are becoming. For those of us who follow Jesus, we call this spiritual formation, which is really just a way for us to understand that if we want to become more like Jesus, then we need to practice doing the things that Jesus himself practiced. And so I want to talk to you about the practice of hospitality. Now, the word itself in Greek is a compound word, philoxenia, which basically means a lover of strangers or a lover of foreigners. And so if I were to define hospitality, I would say it like this. Hospitality is the practice of welcoming in our neighbors through relationships, safety, and food. You got to remember food, in the same way that God has welcomed us in. And so imagine for a moment a life that is opened, your apartment, your home that is opened in a way that welcomes people in to the degree that they can be transformed by the same God who has welcomed you and I in and transformed us. When you look at the life of Jesus through the Gospels, we can easily forget that the most influential person to ever walk the earth, the greatest human being to ever live, Jesus of Nazareth, practiced hospitality. He loved being in homes. He was regularly in homes. He loved to be at the table to share a meal with people. In fact, there's one account in the Gospel of Luke where Jesus is at a dinner party. A lot of religious people are there. And at one moment, a sinful woman, we're told, walks in and begins to wash his feet. Now, this bothers people so much that Jesus addresses their frustration. And at one point, he turns to this high-ranking religious official named Simon, and he says, "Simon, do you see this woman? Do you see this woman?" You see, the reason why I think Christians, all of us, need to recover this practice of hospitality is because we don't know how to see people today. Now, I know, ironically, I say that in a world where we see more and more people through the screens of our phones than we ever have before. But I don't know if we necessarily see people through the lens that Jesus himself sees them. What I mean by that is this. First, we don't see people to see human beings made in the image of God. Regardless of who they are and what their life story is, they are a human being made in the image of God. Secondly, we don't see people because we have labeled them. And when you have reduced someone to a label, you simply can't understand who they actually are. You no longer have to do the hard, intentional work of trying to actually understand them and seeing them for who they truly are. And so the practice of hospitality recovers our sight as we welcome people in. And here's how I think we can begin to practice this. First, I want you to identify your neighbors. Think about the people who you live around, maybe a coworker, or maybe a family through a friend's or a kid's relationship at your school, right? And think about someone who is different than you and consider inviting them in. I feel like God has had me reflect lately in my own personal life. Fredo, how many people have come into your home who are different from you, who are not like you? And then secondly, I want you to make a plan to host them to your apartment. Even though you might not love your space is good enough for God, and it's good enough for that person to have a rich encounter. Maybe it's a coworker who you just bring lunch to and you have a meal with. Maybe it's a longtime friend who doesn't yet know Jesus and you bring them in. Make a plan. Identify them, make a plan. And then lastly, I want you to actually follow through and invite them over. I've been challenged recently by a woman who isn't a Christian, and she was addressing Christians, and she said, "Why would you invite me to your church if you haven't first invited me into your home?" And I've been really struck by that challenge because, of course, we can imagine a scenario in which someone encounters God through a church service. But can we imagine a scenario in which that same person encounters God in your very home, as you share a meal with them, as you get to know their story? And over the process, we see these people not as projects, but as real human beings. And so relieve yourself of the pressure, because remember, this is a practice. And so give yourself grace. Understand that this is a journey that we can take people on to encounter the same God who has welcomed us in by the way that we welcome in other people into our lives as well. Because the Christian message, when you think about it, is a story of a God through Jesus who went and found people who were wandering and invited them into his home. And so imagine that as you and I recover this practice of hospitality, we can give people a taste, an appetizer, if you will, of what it's like to finally be home. Because I am more and more convinced that the aching and the longing of every human soul is the longing to be home. And so imagine through this regular practice, as you find time in your weeks and your calendars to bring people in, you can give them a taste of what it's like to finally be home in Jesus. Grace and peace.
Good.